is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth really as good as everyone has been saying? And did all the critics praising it actually finish the game before publishing their reviews? I only ask this because there's a belief held by some video game critics that you can know what score to give a game after just 20 minutes of playing it. And the rest of the time playing is just accumulating material to substantiate that score. Now, I've always believed that to be a reasonable theory. It doesn't apply to every game, however. Vanilla No Man's Sky springs to mind. And I don't think it applies to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth either. This game was a perfect 10 for me in the opening few chapters. I was absolutely loving it. But as it went on, that perfect 10 score steadily dropped. And while it's still the best Final Fantasy game I've played in a long time, it's also one of the most frustrating games too. There's a fair few things that really bug me about Rebirth. Mainly Chadley.
Good news, Cloud. Mako in the area. Analysis complete. I sense exasperation.
He's an annoying floppy blonde fart who undermines the entire plot of Final Fantasy VII in ways you might not have even realised. More on that in a minute. But generally, it's problems that stem from developer Square Enix's tendency towards excess and their overkill approach to the retelling of the original story. It's a bit like Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies. Both this game and those movies are adaptations of a much smaller body of work, both blown up into a massive trilogy with everything unnecessarily turned up to 11. And feel free to shoot me in the balls for saying this, but to me, it feels like a lot of the creative decisions made by the developers working on this game were based on what they thought was cool, as opposed to what works with the story and its wider themes. But before we get into that, let me just quickly highlight the things that I really loved about Rebirth. So, the characters, bless them, they're all wonderfully portrayed and fully fleshed out, and it's really great to see them all together, bonding as pals and fighting as a team. Crucially, they didn't mess this up and make any of the characters really annoying. Mostly. Combat is one of the most satisfying real-time battle systems Square has ever come up with. The game world is gorgeous with stunning vistas up the yin-yang. And there's the incredible soundtrack, OVS. And then finally Queen's Blood, which is the best computerized card game since Solitaire. So that's the good stuff. But now then, let's talk about Square Enix's excessive nature when it comes to the creative choices they made when adapting the original game and rebirthing it into this, the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So here's a clear example straight off the bat. The character Johnny. In the original, he was just some guy in the background of like 2 scenes or whatever. And if you happen to go into the hotel in Costa del Sol, you can catch him perving on a Shirley in the shower. And that was about it. But now in the Rebirth, he's a fully fledged character. He's running the hotel, and there's literally 12 of the motherfucker. And all of them are goofballing around all over the place from arseholes till sundown. And that's the level of reckless expansion that we're talking about here. Okay, sorry, no, that's a bad example. I've got no beef with Johnny. He's a good bro. Let's look instead at the Loveless play at the Gold Saucer. So in the original game, you'd go on a date with another character at the Gold Saucer, and during the course of the evening, you'd wind up starring in a play. It's a hammy little pantomime with a beardy king and a green dragon, standard shiz. You muddle your way through, do a twirl, and get to kiss your date at the end. That's pretty much it. It's a cute little moment designed to develop the relationship between the characters and in turn increase your own fondness for them, and it succeeds at that. In Rebirth, it's an absolute frickin' spectacle. This time you put on a pair of VR goggles, and through the use of advanced technology, you become the star of the show. The play is now an epic quick-time event extravaganza, and it looks like a grim dark Les Mis. It's wonderfully over the top, but I've absolutely no idea how it's supposed to work. And I was wondering, because it's now VR, is everyone saying their lines while they're still sat in their seats? Is the rest of the audience watching you in the play, or are they each starring in their own play? Is Sid falling asleep in real life, or in VR? Is he asleep on a virtual stage in his own play? How does Cloud's VR helmet know that Barrett has got a gun for an arm? What's the point of having a seat in a box if it's VR? Why was Aerith picked to sing a song 1 minute before the play starts? A song she wrote 2 hours before. Did she win a competition? Did she write the music as well? Has she always liked singing songs? Why does she suddenly see the spirits of 3 people that she's never met before? And so on. it's a bit weird. And it's all steam and no ham. And really, for all of its bombacity, it isn't innovative or illuminating in any way. It doesn't build on the relationships between the characters or add anything to the story in a meaningful way. Now, you may disagree and shoot me in the balls for saying this, but listen to this as an idea. Drop all the VR nonsense, but keep the same visuals, the costumes, the action, the intensity, but instead have it be a product of Cloud's wildly overblown imagination. Like he's really getting into it, like his mind is running away from him and he's imagining all of these intense special effects and production values. Something that might suggest that he's not fully in control of his own mind. Like a nod to how he can get lost in another persona really easily. You know, something that might fit a bit better thematically with the rest of the story. But nope, VR. I guess VR is just cool, so just don't think too much about it, I guess. I'll tell you what isn't cool though, little chudnut Chadley. He's a fucking Fraggle who doesn't shut up, and his endless twaddle is made even worse by the fact that they could have easily parcelled out all of his dialogue to other characters, namely Sid and Vincent, who are otherwise just hanging around in the background, sucking on arsewipes and not doing anything much really. But annoying as all that is, that's not even the worst thing about this twerp. The worst thing about Chadley is that he's a cyborg. And not just any old cyborg, a perfect replica of a human boy. Now, Cyborg Chadley is actually a reveal from the last game, but it's been stuck in my craw ever since. And you might say, so what? This is a magical fantasy land with gun arms and talking dogs. Why not some cyborgs? Well, I think the problem with having cyborgs running around is that it brings up themes of the sense of self and the essence of the individual and of what are we if not our memories and our humanity. Themes that come very close to the struggles of the main protagonist and the main antagonist. So, just by sheer proximity, is Cloud's little identity crisis really so big a deal? In comparison to having a perfect synthetic human who's cast off the chains of his oppressive creator and gone out into the wide world. Is getting a few of your memories mixed up really that big of a deal when they're a fully autonomous, fully sentient, totally convincing human AI walking around like it's absolutely nothing? We've already seen one character get upset by the unnatural circumstances of their creation. Who's to say that this little titty biscuit boy won't throw a tantrum and burn down a town as well? Because someone needs to be keeping an eye on this little fuck. I mean, a cyborg. This is an excessive detail. It's a needless distraction and a detriment to the story. And Rebirth has been lauded for its care and attention to detail and its reverence for the original game. But sometimes it feels like the changes made in Remake and Rebirth are the opposite and are actually a little bit careless. Why couldn't he have just been a Boy Scout, a regular human Boy Scout? A plucky young environmentalist who asks Cloud and the gang for help with his studies on all the creatures and rocks and stuff. But nope, cyborg boy. And if all that wasn't bad enough, AI girl, May, is it? Ugh. It's not enough for Square Enix to give all the dialogue to one robotic streak of jizz, they had to go and create another one too. I mean, fucking hell. So, I mean, it does get a bit tricky because you could say a lot of this stuff applies to Kate Sith, of course. He's a robot too, and he's always been there, roboting it up. And he is a weird and jarring character that's never really sat well with me either, but when I played the original, I always imagined under his fur he was like some sort of steampunk automaton powered by a lump of materia or something. That was my headcanon anyway, you've got to go with your headcanon. But here's the thing AAA game developers don't seem to realise. There isn't a game engine or 3D graphics renderer that's as powerful as a person's imagination. Because games are an imaginative space. You fill in the gaps. I think that's a huge part of why the original game had such a big impact on players, because a large portion of it took place in the player's imagination. But now here in these remakes, he's a perfect robot cat, and there's cyborg boys going around calling you relentlessly on hologram phones. Ugh, oh well, anyway, cyborgs are just cool, okay, so just don't think too much about it. I just think it's one of those things. If you want to get the most enjoyment out of a Final Fantasy game, you just need to ignore the parts of it that you don't like. A bit like with Star Wars or the lore. Anyway, speaking of things you can ignore, there's a lot of side content in this game. Like, a lot. And that's actually one of the more common complaints about this game, is its bloatedness. and how the pacing of the game feels meandering and the main objective feels a bit unfocused. And yeah, I myself am not entirely sure what the point of the adventure is. I mean, we're following the dudes in the black robes because they'll lead us to Sephiroth, and we have to stop Sephiroth because he wants to destroy the planet, and he's in the wrong for wanting to do that. That's just not on. But he hasn't done it yet because he needs the black materia, and so we're going to go and get that to stop him from getting it. I think that's pretty much it, but I'm not sure. It probably doesn't help that this is part 2 of 3, but still, it feels a little bit loosey-goosey. And the other common complaint is that the actions and activities you partake in feel disjointed and at odds with that objective. Like, I should be saving the planet, so why am I playing Chase Me games with Care Bears in a treehouse dreamland? And why am I playing Fall Guys with a bunch of frogs? And now, why am I playing football with a bunch of dogs? Why am I playing cards with a dog? Why am I playing cards with a chocobo? Why am I playing cards with a robot? And so on. I mean, I don't mind that stuff so much. Most of it was really fun. And if it wasn't fun, it was usually optional. But the thing is, all of this slack pacing and open world meandering was present in the original game. Instead of saving the world, you were off breeding chocobos and snowboarding and digging up old bones. And it seems like it would have been a good opportunity to have tidied that up a bit. Now, I enjoy the whimsical side content, don't get me wrong, but I had really hoped they'd try at least to tie it into the story a little bit more. Like, I don't know, something about the Shinra reactors are polluting the Mog houses and all the Moogles are drowning in Mako reactor sludge and you need to rescue them. Or what about having Dio be a secret Avalanche supporter and half of the gold saucer profits help them to fight against Shinra for the planet's survival because he feels bad about being a corporate a-hole whose massive golden amusement park has drained the natural resources of the surrounding area and turned it into a desert. So then whenever you waste time playing games there, you're actually contributing to the fight against saving the planet from Shinra. I mean, I'm just pissballing here, but you know, that's all I want, just a little bit of contextualization to the superfluities. Because I get this nagging feeling when I'm playing Pirate Blaster at Costa del Sol or whatever that I'm not really entirely sure why I'm doing it. And that feeling comes up a lot in Rebirth, and way more than it did in the original, so I kinda wish they'd fixed that. Chadley told me that stuff about the desert, by the way. Quite an interesting bit of world-building lore, I thought, just to be given to that fucking plimsoll. Anyway, that same nagging feeling of doing something and not knowing why comes up again for me during the boss fights. The many boss fights. So, as I said, the battle system in Rebirth is fantastic, and it's frequently emphasised by the boss battles. They're high-impact, intense set pieces intended to challenge your combat strats and test your fighting techers. But for me, the boss fights are a well that the game draws from far too often. It feels like more often than not, bosses are just incidental, as opposed to being tied to the narrative in a clear or coherent way. Like Rufus. The president of Shinra hasn't really got anything to do in this middle portion of the story, so they just fly him in on the Shoehorn Express to fight you for no real reason. We got a metal tentacle arm added to Barrett's bestie Dine too, but that wasn't excessive enough, so it's time for another boss fight immediately. Again, coming in hot on the Shoehorn Express, it's Palmer in a massive robot. Good old Palmer. Wait, who are you again? Shinra has seemingly unlimited resources when it comes to robots and artillery to throw at you, and defeating them in battle seems inconsequential most of the time. For me, a good fight should be meaningful and should be motivated in some way. For example, they spend a lot of time talking about saving the planet, but rarely, if ever, does winning a big battle feel like it will help in that endeavour in any way. Half the time you're not really saving anyone. Of course, too many boss fights is not a complaint you can fairly apply to a video game, where fighting is a vital ingredient and a core component of how you interact with the world. I don't mind having a rumble with a monster because I've wandered into its house by mistake or whatever, but this is a story-driven video game, and again, quite often while fighting a boss, I'm not entirely sure why I'm doing it. And so, by the time the game concludes, something has happened. I'm not entirely sure what. Overlapping worlds, alternate timelines, it's unclear at this juncture. But no promises await at Journey's End, that's for sure. And this word salad of a title card is indicative of how convoluted the story has become. And the story wasn't easy to follow to begin with in the original. And that's what really frustrates me most about these remakes, is that I could more easily tolerate the interminable boss fights and that arse-cheek Chadley if I knew this game was heading towards a satisfying and sensible conclusion. The remake trilogy is the perfect opportunity to iron out the story above anything else. Get the story straight, make it tight. But instead, it just feels like they're making it more confusing. I mean, the amount of theories and explainers that are floating around online is more than optimal. Unless we're talking about the latest David Lynch film, then there really shouldn't be a need for this many attempts at explaining the ending. You're always dicing with death when you start messing with alternate timelines. Multitasking storylines is a bad idea. Simplicity is complexity resolved, as they say. But Square Enix's mantra seems to be complexity is complexity unresolved and made more complex. Because when there's too many messages and too many story threads and too many ideas, it's harder for them to be communicated effectively. And in turn, harder for the emotional messages to land. And so for me, my main response to it all was confusion and fatigue. To be fair, this is still only part 2, so I suppose it might still resolve itself into a tidy little package, but I do remember thinking the same thing about The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, so I have my doubts. But, you know, just as worlds unite, so too do they part. Yeah? But then who's to say they can't unite again after they've parted? Huh? I think what they're trying to say is that anything can happen and no one's ever really gone. And dead people can suddenly be alive in a different world somewhere. And then, if we tear Sephiroth's cosmic anus a new one, maybe we can reunite everyone and have big party time. I don't know. Multiple dimensions and alternative realities and resurrecting characters just feels a bit like print your own get out of plot jail free cards. I think maybe they wanted me to be enticed by the endless possibilities, but instead I'm just confused and annoyed by the non-committal clusterfudge of infinite possible outcomes. To me, it just means there's no consequences, and if there's no consequences, there's no drama, and there's nothing to root for, and then there's no point. I mean, if that's even what's going on. I'm talking like I know that there's multiple realities, but it could all just be Chadley's dream or a VR performance at the Gold Saucer. Oh, I don't know. It's very confusing and it makes me very tired. And now I need my oxygen and my blankie. But this is my final thought on the problems with excess and cramming too much stuff into a video game. Big boss fights, flashy minigames, and massive open worlds with all the towers that need activating. They all to me just feel like the product of the AAA pipeline. And we associate AAA studios with big budgets and large teams, capable of producing games that have got amazing graphics, open worlds, lots of fireworks, and big battles in outer space. And it feels like these large development studios are kind of becoming slaves to this approach. And any kind of restraint is not really a practice you associate with AAA game development. And it feels like anything kind of meaningful or with any kind of narrative poignancy takes a back seat. But yeah, narrative poignancy doesn't sell video games, does it? Big space battles and open worlds do. But I personally feel like they rebirthed their eggs into the wrong basket. There's way too much effort being put into extraneous detail, and the all-important story, including arguably one of the most impactful moments in gaming history, gets fumbled and ultimately lost in the shuffle. And that's the trouble. Too much is too much. But, as I'm sure Square Enix and all the other big AAA studios already know, for those to whom much is given, much is expected. So, there you go. Pretty good game, 7 out of 10. Like and subscribe. See you later.